I go by the name Alice, leading a seemingly ordinary life as a housewife. My husband John is an exceptionally kind partner, and our relationship has been free of any disagreements. It's not to boast, but he truly is the ideal companion. Currently residing in an apartment close to John's parents' house, this decision was intentional. With both my parents no longer with us, we wanted to be nearby in case of the birth of our child or any unforeseen issues. Additionally, considering the potential future care needs of John's parents, I saw the practicality of our living arrangement. However, a strange occurrence started to unfold during our dinner gatherings with John's parents. Mysterious stomach pains plagued me, leading me to initially avoid meals at John's house. Unfortunately, circumstances forced me to attend, and that's when an unexpected event transpired, revealing a shocking revelation about my mother-in-law's actions, shedding light on the source of my inexplicable pain. Before these unsettling events, John and I had opted out of a traditional wedding ceremony. I wasn't keen on being the center of attention, and we believed redirecting funds towards travel and hobbies made more sense than a lavish ceremony. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law, who conducted free cooking classes as a hobby, proposed a dinner party to celebrate our marriage. Excited to showcase her culinary skills, she warmly welcomed John but exhibited a noticeable coldness toward me. Despite the confusion, the dinner party proceeded with a variety of exquisite dishes prepared by her, momentarily overshadowing the earlier sense of unwelcome. Expressing gratitude for the delightful meals, I thought the initial discomfort might have been a misunderstanding. However, that night, severe stomach pain struck suddenly, leading to a rushed visit to the emergency room. Despite inconclusive diagnosis due to the absence of a specialist, my condition stabilized after receiving IV treatment for 2 hours. The cause of my distress, possibly linked to expired bread consumed earlier, remained a mystery. After returning home with John, I found myself grappling with unexplained stomach pain every time I dined at my in-laws' place following a particular incident. Seeking advice, I discussed this issue over lunch with a long-lost friend. She suggested, "Could it be that simply visiting your husband's house is causing you stress?" Surprisingly, she had experienced a similar situation, falling ill due to harassment from her mother-in-law. After relocating to a new apartment further away, her health improved significantly. Although I hadn't initially considered visits to my in-laws as a source of stress, my friend's advice made me ponder if there was an underlying unease in my heart. Concerned about my recurring illnesses, my husband, who had initially brushed off the matter, began to take it seriously. Consequently, he suggested that we temporarily halt our visits to my in-laws. While the exact cause remained elusive, my husband suspected his mother's cooking, given my consistent bouts of illness after meals there. According to him, his mother often expressed loneliness and a desire for shared meals, but he had declined due to his worry for my health. Despite our decision to refrain from visiting, a new challenge emerged. My brother-in-law was scheduled to visit our parents for his wedding greetings, and a family dinner was arranged. Reluctantly, my husband explained, "I can't decline this time, as my brother is going to our parents' place. We're expected to participate in the dinner meeting with the entire family." Despite my inclination to avoid a direct encounter with my mother-in-law, I couldn't neglect the familial obligation tied to my brother-in-law and his wife. Deciding to participate in the family dinner, little did anyone anticipate the ensuing commotion it would cause. Despite my husband's concern for my health, he advised me, "Alice, you don't have to eat the meals today." As we arrived at the dinner meeting, my mother-in-law greeted us with her usual warm smile, particularly directed at my husband. However, I couldn't help but sense an even colder attitude towards me compared to before. Upon entering the room, my brother-in-law and his wife were engaged in a pleasant conversation with my father-in-law. My mother-in-law's homemade dishes were beautifully presented on the table, emitting an enticing aroma that stirred my appetite. The mystery persisted. Why did I fall ill after consuming these seemingly delicious meals? No matter how I pondered, the reason eluded me. Seated at the table, my mother-in-law promptly urged me to start eating. Swiftly, my husband intervened, stating that I wasn't feeling well. However, she seemed to dismiss my condition as a minor issue, offering me a dish with a wordless smile, almost challenging me to eat. Feeling at a loss for words, my brother-in-law came to my defense, expressing gratitude for my presence despite my illness. He suggested it was sufficient to exchange greetings and encouraged me to go home and rest if needed. Informed in advance by my husband, he and his wife stood by my side. Ignoring their son's words, my mother-in-law insisted on packaging the dish in a Tupperware for me to try later. Wondering why she was so insistent on my eating, I nodded to avoid upsetting her. As she went to the kitchen to fetch the Tupperware, a loud clatter interrupted the scene. All eyes turned to my father-in-law, who was clutching his stomach in pain despite not having started his meal. In a panic, my mother-in-law asked what happened, and he, in agony, replied, "My stomach hurts so much I can't bear it." The cause of his suffering remained unclear, adding another layer of tension to the already tumultuous dinner. I had only taken a few nibbles from the kitchen before the gathering, and suddenly my father-in-law collapsed weakly. Disbelief struck me as my mother-in-law, panicked, exclaimed, "You must be joking. That was something I made to feed Alice." "Wait, this is not the time to think about that. Call an ambulance." Without hesitation, she dialed for an ambulance and rushed to the hospital with my father-in-law. We all stood frozen, staring, processing the unexpected turn of events. However, her earlier words lingered in my mind, the revelation that what my father-in-law had snacked on was intended for me. It implied there might be something wrong with that particular dish. Driven by concern, I headed to the kitchen, a place my mother-in-law had always kept me away from. There, I discovered something that left me in shock, finally understanding why I would fall ill and why my father-in-law had collapsed. The realization that she would do something like this struck me as utterly absurd. Reeling from the revelation, I knew I had to decide how to handle this betrayal. Forgiveness wasn't an option. Revenge became a necessity. Each of us drove to the hospital where my father-in-law was taken. After checking in at the reception, we headed straight for the patient room. Inside, we could hear two voices, one unmistakably my mother-in-law's, and the other likely a male doctor. She was being questioned about what had happened. "I'm telling you, I don't know anything. He just suddenly collapsed while we were all enjoying the meals," my mother-in-law insisted. The doctor probed further, asking if he had consumed anything rotten or expired. Evading the questions, my mother-in-law continued to deny any knowledge. Summoning courage, I took a deep breath and knocked on the hospital room door. Flustered, my mother-in-law greeted us. "Oh, Alice and John, you're here too. Your father is okay. Please go home and enjoy dinner with the four of you." However, her somewhat flustered manner and attempt to close the door heightened my suspicions. I seized the moment and asserted, "No, I'd like to talk to you for a bit." Behind me, my husband silently projected his presence, while my brother-in-law and his wife sent sharp, cold glances. Faced with this collective insistence, my mother-in-law couldn't refuse and reluctantly said, "Okay." Allowing us into the room, my father-in-law's facial color appeared to be returning, showing signs of stability. However, the exact cause remained undetermined. Though he was still conscious when brought to the hospital, he had been frequently using the bathroom. The doctor explained that he eventually lost consciousness due to dehydration. Attempting to offer an excuse, my mother-in-law forced a smile, saying, "Well, your father is getting old, and he drinks beer every day." Her attempt at justification seemed feeble, and realizing that neither the doctor nor we were convinced, she fell silent, closing her mouth. I looked at my mother-in-law with a stern gaze, took evidence out of my bag, and presented it to her. As she observed the contents, her eyes widened, and she broke into a cold sweat, visibly confused. "Mother-in-law, isn't this a laxative? I found some powdered laxatives in the kitchen. What's this about?" I inquired calmly, but she remained silent. The doctor, examining the laxatives, seemed to understand. Oh, that would make sense if he had diarrhea without being food poisoned. Generally, intake of laxatives is a possibility, he explained. Subsequent detailed examinations revealed that my father-in-law had indeed ingested a significant amount of laxatives. The final diagnosis pointed to the laxatives making his intestines hyperactive, causing repeated abdominal pain, diarrhea, and ultimately dehydration. Cornered and unable to make excuses any longer, my mother-in-law hesitated before finally saying, "Wait. At first, I only expected Alice to get a little sick. But because Alice was fine, I gradually increased the amount of laxatives." The confession laid bare the motive for her actions, a sense of loss over her perceived detachment of her beloved eldest son from her. Starting with a small amount of laxatives out of spite, she admitted to progressively escalating the dosage, ultimately reaching a point where it caused a person to collapse. My surprise was impossible to conceal as I confronted my mother-in-law, stating, "What you've done is just crazy. You may not know this, but I've been to the hospital multiple times for IVs due to unexplained symptoms. Despite this, I can't understand why you would attempt to mix in such a huge amount of laxatives." Unable to find room for argument after having her mistake pointed out, my mother-in-law hung her head in frustration. A series of criticisms followed from her sons. "Mom, no matter the circumstances, this can't be forgiven. It just so happens that Alice didn't respond that sensitively to the laxatives. But what you've done is the same as a crime," my husband exclaimed. His words were echoed by my brother-in-law, who expressed, "I thought it was unthinkable, but were you trying to do the same thing to my wife? Thinking about it that way is really scary." He pulled his wife closer, throwing a stern gaze at his mother. The doctor intervened, emphasizing, "Medication should be used in the proper amounts and methods, as your son said. Luckily, your daughter-in-law's symptoms were mild, but your husband had no resistance to laxatives, thus resulting in this severe reaction." Unable to bear the criticism, my mother-in-law, despite her age, began to cry like a small child. From the bed, a voice was heard, my father-in-law, who had regained consciousness. He exclaimed, "How could you do such a terrible thing?" Crying, my mother-in-law grasped his hand, apologizing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." However, he forcefully shook off her hand. Frozen in place, shocked by the unfolding events, my mother-in-law witnessed my father-in-law letting out a deep sigh. He continued, "Even if you didn't intend to hurt me, it's a fact that you've caused Alice to suffer a lot. That's not right. It's a shameful act as a human being." In response to his words, my mother-in-law begged for forgiveness, clinging to him. She turned to me, apologizing for her actions and pledging never to repeat such behavior. Seeking my forgiveness, she expressed hope that my husband and the boys would also be convinced. Witnessing this emotional scene, I found myself torn between the desire for retribution and the possibility of forgiveness. I cynically thought it must be a performance, and she wasn't genuinely remorseful about what she had done to me, so I smirked. "Ah, what are you talking about? I'm not even considering forgiving you now after all I've been through," I asserted. In solidarity, my husband stood beside me and added, "Mother, stay away from Alice. I can no longer think of someone who hurt my beloved wife as family." The declaration stunned my mother-in-law, causing her to collapse to her knees, rejected as family by her own son. Observing the scene, my brother-in-law nodded and stated firmly, "I can't imagine living with someone who could potentially harm my wife. I have no intention of you being my family anymore." His words echoed a unanimous sentiment against her. As my mother-in-law continued to beg for forgiveness, broken down in tears, no one uttered a word. Everyone simply looked down at her, realizing that her selfish jealousy had caused this situation. Desperate for support, she turned to my father-in-law, seemingly forgetting he had already rejected her. Sobbing, she implored, "What about you? You won't abandon me, your wife, will you?" However, my father-in-law retorted, "What of it? I can't stay with someone who commits such inhumane acts anymore. I want a divorce." Crushed by his words, My mother-in-law was left devastated. Agreeing with my husband's suggestion to let my father-in-law rest, we bid farewell to him and exited the hospital room. While waiting for my husband to retrieve the car at the entrance, my mother-in-law, panting, suddenly ran towards us. "Begging you, Alice, please forgive me," she pleaded. Looking at her tear-streaked and snotty face, I responded, "I have no reason to risk my life to be with you, mother-in-law. If I forgive you now, I don't think it will truly be for your benefit." I responded coldly to my mother-in-law, and just as I finished speaking, my husband arrived in the car. We got in, and through the window, I told my mother-in-law, "This is goodbye. We will likely never meet again. Take care." Her response to my cold words was silence. She watched us leave, her hand brushing against her sleeve, murmuring something as if in prayer while looking up at the sky. True to my father-in-law's declaration, he divorced and moved out. In the aftermath, my husband and brother-in-law severed ties with their mother. Previously, my father-in-law had been the leaseholder and paid the rent for the apartment. However, since he left after the divorce, I had to start paying the rent myself. My mother-in-law, having been a housewife all her life, struggled to figure out how to earn a living. Despite trying to make ends meet with the money she received from the property division in the divorce, it quickly ran out. Attempts to charge for her cooking classes and outreach for various work opportunities failed, with the news of the incident spreading and leaving her with no students. Consequently, she couldn't pay the rent, was evicted from her home, and only then did she grasp the harshness of reality. Now homeless, my mother-in-law began looking for work, facing the difficulties of life without a place to live. This, as people say, is karma. Shortly after being released from my unexplained illness, I found out that I was pregnant. My husband and father-in-law, despite the divorce, remained in contact. Upon hearing about my pregnancy, my father-in-law was overjoyed, even more so than we were. He had already prepared a stroller and car seat for us, a gesture that truly felt like a blessing. Discovering a playful side to my previously silent father-in-law, I am filled with joy as a family member. What's more, my brother-in-law and his wife had twins, unexpectedly expanding our family. Our lives became more lively, and I am genuinely looking forward to our new life with our new family members and the fresh days ahead.